Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Winfree, and what you're about to listen to is a re-air of an old show I used to host called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. I hosted this show from 2013 to 2015. I'm very proud of this show. It was a lot of fun. Let me have a lot of very broad conversations. Tonight, what you're listening to is episode 28. It originally aired on December 20th, 2013, and we'll be discussing the villains of Pixar Studio films. The previous two re-airs that you've listened to, hopefully, are Disney-related, and Pixar, being a subsidiary of Disney, deserved its own show. Being something of an independent entity, I tend to consider Pixar films somewhat separate from Disney animated films, at least for my own personal categorization. While Mark Radulich was kind enough to be my guest on the first two episodes, joining me for this one is a different podcast friend of mine by the name of Jeffrey Harris. Jeff is one of the regular movie reviewers over at 411mania.com. You can find his reviews in the movies/television zone. And he used to be my partner in crime on the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast, but scheduling and interest and whatnot have just kind of interfered in that. He is, of course, welcome back whenever he chooses to be on that particular show. He was my guest on this episode to discuss Pixar. If you like Jeff and you like his work, you can still find his reviews over at 411mania.com in the movies/television zone. He is one of the news aggregators and editors over at 411. And you can also find him as part of the This Week in Pro Wrestling podcast with Michael Sandoval. You can find that wherever you find your greater podcast needs. So be on the lookout for Jeff if you happen to enjoy his contributions. Let's get a couple of bills paid before we jump into the show. First up, I would like to thank Grammarly for being one of the sponsors here. For you, listeners of Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, Grammarly is offering a free download of the Grammarly software. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes, while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork. Again, getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork to download Grammarly for free. If typing that in is too much of a hassle, there will be a link in the description below. Really, it's the contextual errors. I mean, we could all use style improvements and vocabulary improvements. I've got a fairly extensive vocabulary myself, and even I could certainly use tremendous help on occasion. But it's the contextual errors, the stuff that you think makes sense, but then when you read it back doesn't. That's the stuff you got to worry about. All right, our other sponsor for the evening is Amazon Music. Look, Pixar, much like Disney, animated Disney, they get the music right. If nothing else that can be said about a Pixar movie, even the lesser entries into the Pixar canon, which are still exceptional films by any appreciable metric, they get the music right. So if you want to hear the music from any of the movies we discussed tonight or any Pixar that has released since, Amazon Music is a great way to do so. Go to getamazonmusic.com/W2Mnetwork. And again, there will be a link in the description if you're so inclined. Amazon Music, and it's a great service, and you'll get it for free. Free 30 days. Click the link or type it in. Fill out the form. Let them know that we sent you. Look, Amazon gives these things out. It helps us if they know that we're the ones who sent you, because otherwise it could have been anybody. And we'd like to grow this a little bit more, so let them know that it was us. Thank you very much for that. Last little bit of bookkeeping here. Again, this originally aired December 20th, 2013, so the material covered will be Toy Story through Monsters University. If you're looking for a discussion of Inside Out, Finding Dory, Luca, which we'll be releasing soon, about the time this was released, actually. They're releasing fairly close to each other. It might already be out. Coco, any of those all came out after the fact, so my apologies. But if you would like if this show comes back in any capacity, Pixar will be due a revisit, I'm sure. So if you like this show and would like to see it potentially revived, let me know. Just listen to the show, share it around, and yeah, that will be. It might come back, no promises, but I like the show. I like the conversations it let me have, so it's always kicking around in the back of my head that maybe. All right, that is enough rambling from me. Let me send it back to myself in 2013 for Everyone Loves a Bad Guy, Pixar Edition.
When the devil is too busy and death a bit too much, they call on me by name, you see, for my special touch. To the gentlemen, I'm misfortune. To the ladies, I'm surprise. But call me by any name, anyway, it's all the same. I'm the fly in your suit, I'm the pebble in your shoe, I'm the bee beneath your bed, I'm the bump on every head, I'm the heel on which you slip, I'm a pin in every head, I'm the thorn in your side, makes you wiggle and ride. And it's so easy when you're evil. This is the life you see, the devil tips his hat to me. I do it all because I'm evil, and I do it all for free. Your tears are all the pay I'll ever need.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, assuming you're listening to this in the evening. If not, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time you happen to listen to us. If it's midnight and you're listening to this to stay awake while you're driving, good evening to you. I hope you enjoy it. I am your host, Robert Winfree, and this is Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we are wrapping up our look at Disney villains, well, animated Disney. I have not touched the live Disney films, the live-action Disney movies yet, though I assume that's coming down the line. Mark Radlich was our guest the last couple of weeks. We looked at the Disney animated films and had a lot of fun with it. I very deliberately left off the films from the studio Pixar because I kind of regard them as a separate entity. And when the time came to do Pixar, Mark said, I haven't seen all of them. Other people are more knowledgeable, and that kind of brings me to my guest tonight. If you've been to 411mania.com, which I hope you have because I write for them, you've probably read something he's done. He's in every zone. He also, probably most prolifically, he does movie reviews for the site and does a very good job of it. If you listen to the 411 Ground and Pound radio show, he's been a panelist there for longer than I have. So everyone, just give a warm welcome to Mr. Jeffrey Harris. Jeff, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good evening, Robert. I am still breathing. Thank you for asking. What a wonderful way to sort of have a Disney-sember of sorts to look at Disney villains.
Yeah, I've had a lot more fun with this one than I initially thought I would. When I first started this podcast, Disney villains were high on my list of priorities. I just couldn't find anyone to talk with me about them for a while until I got established. Then I really wanted Mark on for the traditional ones because he's a parent and I don't know too many other people who were willing or able to come on who were, and I wanted a parent's perspective on it. And I'm glad you're here for this one. I know you've reviewed several of the Pixar films for 411 Mania. You live not too far from Disney Studios, if memory serves. I know you've seen some of their premieres there.
In fact,
so
yes, I've been to Disney premieres. I've been to every D23. I've been to the Disney lot to see films. Speaking of Disney-sember and Walt Disney, I was on the Disney lot a couple weeks ago to see Saving Mr. Banks. So if you go to 411mania.com/movies right now, you can read my official review of Saving Mr. Banks, which was a very amazing experience to get to see a film sort of about the making of Mary Poppins in the very buildings where they were making the movie. And afterwards, my friends and I, who I went to see the movie with, we went to pay our respects to Walt and his late daughter. So it was a very amazing experience. And speaking of Pixar, earlier this year I did Monsters University for the site as well. So you can read that. And I also interviewed the story supervisor for the film, Kelsey Mann. So this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart.
I was very glad that you were able to do this one with me. Now, I mentioned this before, but I kind of like going chronologically as far as these things go. That way we can track, the evolution of storytelling from studios in some cases.
Right.
Pixar.
Speaking of villains, it's very interesting that we're doing Pixar because not all of Pixar films have sort of a traditional villain in sort of the way villains are known sort of throughout Disney stories,
Yeah, and actually, I kind of disagreed with, since we were going to start with Toy Story, because that was Pixar's first feature-length film, done all in CGI, revolutionized how animated films were done. I mean, books have been written about the effect that the first Toy Story film has had. But when I listened to The Long Road to Ruin, and Mark and Sean were kind of breaking down the first Toy Story, and they mentioned that there's not really a villain in the traditional sense. You have Sid, provides an obstacle, but he's just kind of a goofy, being a subjective term, he's just kind of a goofy teenager playing with action figures. And yeah, he, blows them up and transposes parts, but those actions are only evil if the world you live in is the one where toys are alive. So for Pixar to kind of come out of the gate with a movie that doesn't have necessarily a traditional villain in the sense of, villains like Maleficent or Scar or any of the the Disney proper villains, it says something about where they're going with their film, with their storytelling and what they want to accomplish. So I want to just kind of start with Toy Story. And if you have a different opinion, if you personally view Sid Phillips as a villain, then I'm open to.
Sid is definitely a villain because he's evil older brother. He not only just goes after the toys, he takes the dolls of his little sister and he messes them up too. So that kind of puts him in an even worse light, because he's not just going after the toys, but he's picking on his little sister. So he's a bully. So that pretty much makes him the perfect villain.
Okay, yeah. I had some minor disagreements as to how they framed that, but I do kind of agree with you, especially in the sense that he is presented as an obstacle for for Buzz and Woody to overcome. Is he a all-time great villain? I don't think he qualifies, especially since at the end, after Woody kind of chastises him about you should respect your toys, he becomes paranoid about them and actually. If you look at Toy Story 3, he winds up being the garbage man for the neighbor, if memory serves me correctly.
Oh wow, I need that. That just shows how I need to see Toy Story 3 again, because that's something I didn't even notice the first time. But I think it's a good point. He's not really. The main problem of the film is not really Sid. Wouldn't you agree, Robert? It's really sort of Woody's journey, and I guess coming to terms with him not being. Andy's favorite toy anymore, and dealing with, but also, Buzz coming to the realization that even though he is a toy and he's not really a real space ranger, he can still has an important role. He still has an important purpose in the world, and that's bringing joy to a child. And what's greater than that,
In terms of traditional, especially Disney villains, the closest thing you kind of get is Mr. Potato, who's kind of a jerk and wishes to expel Woody. But at the same time, Potato Head only kind of becomes a jerk after he thinks Woody has killed Buzz.
It wasn't just Mr. Potato Head. It was the army men, and then when they come back, when they all gang up on Woody and toss him out of the moving truck at the end. Even Bo Peep was getting it. Even Bo Peep was getting in on that action. She didn't care. She didn't want to listen to reason at that point.
They thought he killed RC as well.
So I wouldn't consider Mr. Potato Head a villain in that sense. It was all a big misunderstanding. Sid, I guess, is the closest thing you have to like an actual villain or a traditional villain or antagonist in this movie, really.
Yeah, and he's a great one. I remember watching this as a kid because I was the target demographic when it came out. I saw it in theaters, and I remember just as a kid, but again, you're looking at this through the perspective of toys are alive, so what you're doing with them could at that point it becomes evil, but he's a kid. He thinks they're just hunks of plastic.
Think about this. This movie came out 18 years ago. Can you believe that? It's been 18 years. We're over 18 years removed from the first Toy Story already.
Crazy. But since we're talking about bad guys, the way Pixar moved from, and there were others in the filmography that, as you mentioned, they don't have, and when Mark kind of mentioned this to me, there's some of them that don't have traditional villains. They're more about the story of the protagonist than they are a conflict necessarily. But for the second Pixar film, we go from Toy Story to A Bug's Life. And in A Bug's Life, which, again, you can mention all the films that it borrows from, and does so very well, but you get a traditional bad guy in the form of Hopper, who is basically the leader of kind of a biker gang. I mean, that's the sound effect that they were kind of going for with the...
They're grasshopper bandits in a CG animated insect version of Seven Samurai by Kurosawa. Let's not mince words around here, Robert. It's a CG animated comedic version of Seven Samurai by Kurosawa, and Kevin Spacey is the lead bandit as Hopper. That's what it is. And it's fine. And a lot of good movies rip off Kurosawa. A lot of TV shows rip off the narratives that Kurosawa basically pioneered, and that's fine. That just shows how great of a storyteller and master Kurosawa was, Yeah, everyone wants to rip him off. Yeah, his work still stands up. So if anyone out there who has not seen some of the stuff that Akira Kurosawa has done, at least Seven Samurai is absolutely worth watching. And even though you've probably already seen it in the version of, The Magnificent Seven with Yul Brynner. Also, Ron and Yojimbo. Just because, to me, Ron and Yojimbo are essential because so many things in pop culture and film and television sort of go off of that basic premise of Ron and Yojimbo. Yeah, but getting back to this one, we're kind of going on a tangent there, so let's get back to it. I don't mind the occasional tangent, but yeah. I did not know this originally, but Kevin Spacey was actually not the first choice for Hopper for A Bug's Life. The story of how he came to voice the villain is actually, they wanted, I believe Robert De Niro was the first, and he turned it down more than once. Multiple other actors turned it down, and forget who it was. It might have been John Lasseter or someone from Pixar was talking with Kevin Spacey at the Oscars. I think it was in '95, and approached him about doing it, and he was all for it. So and Kevin Spacey plays a great villain when he wants. I mean, he's Kaiser Soze, Robert. He's Kaiser Soze. He's John Doe. He's Lex Luthor. You could argue he's one of the all-time great cinematic villains. Him, Gary Oldman, Dennis Hopper, Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber. To me, those are seminal on-screen villains. So I think it's par for the course that we have Kevin Spacey voicing a Pixar villain in A Bug's Life. And, A Bug's Life is not my favorite movie, but to me it was just sort of there, where it was a good, enjoyable movie. Everything works very well, but to me nothing about it is outstanding. And kind of the same with Hopper, Kevin Spacey's performance as Hopper. I think it's a good performance, but, nothing. It's not like a great, outstanding performance to me. But everything about the movie, to me, just works really well, and it's a fun, cute little movie. And Spacey does a good job as Hopper. Yeah, to me, the kind of seminal moment for Spacey's Hopper is when they've already gone, they've already told the ants we want double the food that you normally give us after Flick screws up and drops all of it into the lake. And they're happy. They're having fun in the Mexican bar, which is what it is. And Richard Kind, who is one of the great comedic kind of goofballs, doesn't get enough credit, I feel, but he plays his brother, he's a goofball in this. But he goes up to Hopper and he says, some of the guys and I were talking, and we think maybe, why would we bother going back there? We got all the food we could want here. Let's just stay here. We don't need to go back. And Hopper initially is kind of like, why not? We don't have to go anywhere. We'll stay here. It'll be fine. And then he just kind of goes, but wait, there was that one ant that stood up to me. And everyone kind of laughs, like, oh, it's just one ant. And he has the presence of mind and of their situation to go, those ants, no, it's a big deal. Those ants outnumber us 100-1, and if they ever figure it out, we're screwed. And a villain who has a brain, who's not just kind of a goofball or a mindless, force of nature, is automatically, to me at least, more endearing. And so for him to be aware of the situation and of how much they have to, assert just dominance through their attitudes and through their actions as opposed to through, actual force of numbers or martial skill, it is one of those things that sticks in my head and kind of makes me, regard a villain in a slightly different light. Right. Hopper was a cunning, smart dude, and he realized, I've got a rebellion here. I've got to nip this under the bud, or these guys are going, these guys are going to kick us out, and we're going to have nothing. Yeah, and
I've mentioned this before, but a great villain has to have a great ending. And him being fed to the baby birds is, all things considered, pretty horrific from an insect standpoint. But his final sequence when he's chasing Flick and the princess, like in the rain, and there's lightning going off, and then the bird catches him, and he gets it's a really well done ending for a villain. You know, again, if you're a bad guy, you have to have a great send off if you're going to lose. And generally speaking, if you're a bad guy,
I always thought it was kind of funny because what was so humorous about Hopper's End was because it was like, it's terrifying for a bug, but we see, this giant cute bird, and it's kind of, it's kind of fun.
It's a nice looking bird.
It's like to a grasshopper, it's terrifying, but to us, it's not like a monster's about to eat you. It's just like a regular sized cute bird. But to like the grasshoppers, it's like it's like a xenomorph.
I mean, it's a dragon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and again, I always found it. When I first saw that movie, I found it odd that grasshoppers were kind of bullying around ants because ants eat grasshoppers. But,
well,
they turned it on.
Male ants aren't workers. Male ants aren't the worker ants either, are they, Robert? So let's not.
No. No, males are pretty much useless.
I remember. Now this is another tangent, but I remember Ants and A Bug's Life. I think they came out in the same year. And I remember reading articles where people actually complained that the movies were misogynist because they were sort of reassigning the gender roles of the ant colonies in the films, because they had like male ant workers and
the general,
and
Gene Hackman as the general from Ant.
Right, exactly. And then like I read all these articles about how the females are the worker ants and ant communities, blah blah blah. It was just the stupid Yeah,
you're reading way too much into that.
Like I'm really supposed to care about that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think with that, I think we can move on to Toy Story 2, right? Pixar's first ever sequel to their
set the bar really high.
Exactly.
I mean, when I first heard, again, I was 18 years ago. God, I was 10 or 11 when the first Toy Story came out. And so when they did Toy Story 2 4 years later, my initial, upon hearing about it, I just kind of went, I don't need to see a sequel, because that's generally how we have been conditioned to think about sequels. I didn't see that until I was babysitting for some neighbors, and one of their small children wanted to watch. And I wound up watching it, and I was very surprised that here we have a sequel that is good. And we get the first kind of villain of the Toy Story franchise in the form of Kelsey Grammer as Stinky Pete the prospect. And
he was only one of really 3 villains in the movie, if you think about it. But he was definitely the main villain, I would say.
Oh yeah, well you also have, for those of you who haven't seen it, you also have Emperor Zurg, who is accidentally released, and apparently all the Zurg dolls also feel they're actually evil emperors, just as all Buzz Lightyear dolls think they're actually Space Rangers. And then you have the collector who steals Woody from why would you steal from a yard sale, first of all?
That's why you go to a yard sale. You never know what you're going to find.
Yeah, and he finds the holy grail of his collection, which is an original Woody from the Woody's Roundup, and tries to buy it. Andy's mom says, no, it's not for sale. He then steals it, and it is later disgraced.
Yeah, that's why he ended up stealing with, because I think he tried to buy it from Andy's mom at first, and then she said she realized it was a mistake.
Shouldn't be out here.
Woody was, and then
Woody was just helping Wheezy,
making Al the toy collector, Al the greedy toy collector scalper, the true villain. What's worse than a toy scalper, man? What's more villainous than a guy who buys a toy and takes it from the kids who really want it and love it, and sells it for a premium? Those are the true scumbags of the universe.
Yeah, especially in a universe where toys are alive, and I mean that's just and again, stealing from a yard sale is just, to me, it's kind of that's like the sign of that's like ultimate scumbaggery right there. You don't need to steal from a yard.
Anyway, tremendous
especially
performance. I just want to say it's a tremendous performance by Wayne, and I love Al the toy collector, because as a guy who's into figures and collecting myself and loving the Toy Story films, it was great to sort of see that sort of side of toy collecting in the film. The evil, greedy toy scalper.
And Wayne Knight is another one of those kind of underrated guys and he plays a great bad guy when he puts his mind to it. I mean, he's like the only antagonist you get in Seinfeld is Newman. He causes all the problems in Jurassic Park, and here it's just a voice role, but just the way the way Wayne Knight sounds and what we have been conditioned to kind of go along with the sound of his voice is great for a villain because it immediately conjures the image of just kind of the slimy, cowardly, scumbag who just does what they do for their own profit.
I think Kelsey Grammer is another one of those performers who's really underrated. He's most well known for his work on Frasier, and just sort of, that show did have a good reputation, but he's a great performer and actor in his own right. I mean,
I think it's just a shame that so much of, for me personally, I mean, he did great work on Cheers and great work on Frasier. It's just kind of a shame that so many years of his career were tied up in those two shows.
Right, but I mean, he had Boss, which was on for 2 seasons. That was, to me, that was a good show, and he did tremendous work on that show. I think even though it's not a great film, I think he was very well cast as the Beast Hank McCoy in X-Men 3: The Last Stand. And he just
one of the
always
highlights
brings,
of that film.
And to me, and even in his voice work, he always brings some sort of fun. He brings a great vocal quality and performance to all the characters he's voiced in animation. Even in Anastasia, I think he played a fun character that was sort of away from his usual sort of Kelsey Grammer type. And I think the same thing for Stinky Pete the Prospector. He's not like this sort of typical Frasier role, that you might think of when you think of Kelsey Grammer at the time.
Yeah, no, the Stinky Pete the Prospector is as far from Frasier Crane as you can get, pretty much.
And I think what I like about Stinky Pete, even though he doesn't really become like an active antagonist really until the third act, is you understand Stinky Pete. He was kind of the toy that no one ever wanted, no one ever bought him, and to him, this is his way to sort of, I don't know. Game recognition. I mean, like he sort of has his views on Buzz and like in Outer Space Rangers and things. It's not that different from Woody in the first film.
No, there's a lot of
Woody sees himself
similar. There's a fair amount of overlap as far as their initial. Of course, Pete it's almost racism as far as, I don't like space toys, they ruin. I mean, again, it's a minor stretch to call him a racist, but that's just kind of the immediate feeling that I get when he goes, oh no, you can't, no, Space Rangers, boo, space toys, they ruin traditional, Western toys like us. The market never recovered after those darn Space Rangers came out type thing.
And of course we had one of the Pixar's long creative mainstays and co-writer of the film, Andrew Stanton, voicing evil Emperor Zurg, which I think, we have to note that Pixar, they like to cast in-house quite often, and quite often, their writers and directors will play sort of, if not like supporting roles, they'll play significant roles in the picture. So we have Andrew Stanton voicing Emperor Zurg, basically he's the Megatron to Buzz Lightyear's Optimus Prime. And they have, it's mostly played for laughs, but to me these are some of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, when they have their kind of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader battles, and they kind of...
I am your father.
Right, when they meet...
Then he gets knocked off the elevator, and Buzz immediately goes, Dad? And to see them at the end playing catch together, no thanks, I'm catching up with my dad. I mean, it's played for laughs, but at the same time, it's kind of brilliant.
It is brilliant. Those were my favorite moments in the whole film. Like when you see the delusional Buzz, the other Buzz they find in the toy store, and he's like leaning over the elevator. He's like, Father. It's like I was dying. When I remember seeing this with my whole family in the theater in 1999 over the holidays. And I'm just so glad, because originally this movie was meant to be a direct-to-video release. That was kind of what Disney was doing back in the 90s. They would do these direct-to-video sequels, and that's what Toy Story 2 was going to be at first. But at the last minute, in the 11th hour, they decided, let's put some more money in this. Let's release this in theaters. And that's how they got, I forget the character's name, but the toy fixer that Al brings in, he was added in the last second, and also Andy's dog was also added in later.
Yeah, and again, I was hesitant when I first heard about Toy Story 2. After seeing it, I had no reservations at all when, again, in like 2009, they announced that we're getting Toy Story 3. I was just giddy because I had complete faith in the people behind the franchise at that point. But after Toy Story 2,
we knew before that we were going to get Toy Story 3. Originally, it was going to be Disney, sans Pixar, doing it, but that was when there was a period where we didn't know if Pixar and Disney were still going to work together, when it looked like they were possibly going to go their separate ways.
Yeah, there were some dicey contract negotiations and whatnot that went on. But we go from Toy Story 2 into another one where we get some traditional villains, Monsters Incorporated.
Ah, yes.
And in some ways, I kind of view Randall as like the first real villain. Because, I mean, we have Stinky Pete and we have Hopper, but here we get Randall Boggs and Steve Buscemi doing the voice acting, and he looks like a bad guy. He acts like the first time you are introduced to him, you know right away he's a jerk, and we're going to be opposing this guy from the very beginning.
I love Randall Boggs. I have a Disney Infinity figurine of Randall Boggs that was given to me at a Disney event. It's a great performance, and it's actually very interesting how they evolved Randall Boggs, because Pixar films, they kind of go through a sort of story process where the final product can be very different from what they start with. If you can look at these sort of the behind-the-scenes footage in the early animatics they have for Monsters, Inc. On the Blu-ray version of the film, and what they started with was actually quite different. In the final movie, we have James P. Sullivan and Randall Boggs, and they're kind of these two neck-and-neck top-scaring performers at their company, Monsters, Inc. You know, they're a Monster Energy company. They scare little kids and as monsters through, their doors through a portal, and they get energy for their monster world. But in the original version, the way it was is that sort of Sullivan and his partner, Mike Wazowski, were sort of the misfits of their company, and Randall Boggs was the superstar. So in the final product, the way they changed it, Sullivan was kind of the top guy, the golden boy, and Boggs was sort of like the antagonizing sort of second best dude. He was the silver
macho
medal.
man to his Hulk Hogan, if you will.
Right, exactly. He's the silver medalist. Sullivan is the golden boy. And but that's not how it started. Originally, like, Randall Boggs was like, the superstar celebrity, and Sullivan and Mike were just, misfits trying to prove themselves. So I guess it's sort of interesting to see how they went from that to this. And what do you think of that idea of how they started with Randall, Robert?
I'm glad they went a different direction. I mean, it's easy to kind of look back and say, oh, it worked better this way. Obviously it did, but I think the story is more compelling, and especially with some of the later changes that the character makes. Randall goes from being, a kind of a douchebag, but competitive, and I mean, again, he's a jerk, but he's kind of a within the rules jerk. And then later, it's like, no, he and Waternoose are actually going to kidnap children, and it provides more motivation for him in the sense of, I'm finally going to beat Sullivan, and if I have to kidnap children and kill them extracting screams, then so be it. I'm finally going to...
Right. And Waternoose was another interesting one, because he's sort of like another character who we didn't really see as sort of antagonist until really late in the movie.
He's your twist.
Right.
He's the guy who they swerve you with,
right,
because he's the good guy initially.
Right. It was a great twist, and when he becomes a villain, he's actually quite frightening. And it was a great presentation by the animators, but even more so, a great vocal performance by the late James Coburn in one of his really final great performances, I think.
His last voice role, it might have been, that was one of the last things he ever did, if memory served.
Not
the last, but...
Right. He's still, I don't know if it's, considering they do the voice work pretty early in the process, I'm not he could have done this in like 1999 for all we know, but maybe he could have come back later. But in terms of release after this, he appeared in Snow Dogs, which came out in 2002, the less said the better. American Gun in 2002. He did an episode of Arliss that was on in 2002. And, this was definitely his last voice role, and I think he had two other things that came out after this, basically. So one of his last three...
I remember when I first saw it, just to kind of touch on what you said earlier, the way he looked, the character, the way he looks when he's being, kind of the fatherly head of the company, kind of beleaguered and under pressure, but still the good guy. And then when that switch gets thrown and he's the bad guy now, and he's chasing you, and he's got 8 legs, and obviously you're like, no, that's a pretty scary dude when all's said and done.
Right. Because even though we know Randall Boggs is and he's a bad guy, he never really looked. I would say
he's never a physical threat to Sullivan.
He does
beats him through trickery.
I would say Randall at times does look intimidating, but to me he's never really scary. At the end, I really found Waternoose quite scary. And once the flip gets switched, as you say. Yeah, and we go from that into one of the best, not just reviewed, best. This was the highest rated, the highest earning animated feature until Toy Story 3, and that's when we come to Finding Nemo, which is back to not really having a bad in a lot of ways. You have the dentist who kidnaps Nemo, but he's just, getting fish out of the ocean, which is a common practice. You have the granddaughter of the dentist who gets so excited around fish that she shakes them and they wind up dead. But they're not traditional villains in the sense that they're evil or they enjoy being evil. They're just kind of doing their thing, and it just again within the context of this within the world, what they're doing is bad, but they're not necessarily consciously being villains. And you have Bruce, the great white shark, who is recovering apex predator. Yeah. Again, not really what I would call a true villain. He likes to eat fish. Can you blame him? And fish are delicious. And he's a shark. He's supposed to eat. And even then, he was doing fine until he smelled blood. Right. And that was, to me, the true villain of this movie is really Marlin. If you, not like a true villain, but kind of like his own antagonist. He's the one that causes the beast of Bruce to get unleashed. Isn't he the one that knocks Dory in the nose and causes her to spill blood? Yes. And that flips Bruce's switch, and then he goes fish crazy again. So a lot of the problems are really just caused by Marlin as the overprotective father. Yeah, but again, as far as just, it's a great movie. I really love Finding Nemo, but again, there's not a whole lot in terms of bad guys to talk about. There are certainly obstacles to be overcome, but there's not really a personification for everyone to latch onto. Unlike the next one, because this is the one when I said I was doing Pixar, I put it up on Facebook and you kind of jumped all over it. In The Incredibles, the 6th movie from Pixar, we get Syndrome, and Jason Lee providing the voice work for him. So he's the one you really wanted to talk about, so I'm going to let you have that. You want to talk about The Incredibles and Syndrome. Here's your platform. Go ahead. We have Jason Lee playing Buddy Pine, Syndrome, sort of, he's the ultimate fanboy for Mr. Incredible, sort of causes events that ultimately have shockwaves throughout the superhero community, where superheroes are basically, they basically have to put away their masks and capes and sort of embed themselves within society and get regular jobs, and the glory day, this sort of golden age of superhero-dom is over. And then he becomes this rich, wealthy inventor that ultimately decides to get revenge on heroes by using them in his experiments to build a sort of super robot that he will himself control and defeat and become recognized as the ultimate hero. He's a great comic book villain. He's sort of, it's interesting. You sort of have all the sort of classic tropes of a supervillain. You have sort of a character who was sort of spurned and created by the hero, but also he's sort of this postmodern take because he's like this comic book superhero fanboy. And then you have these great moments in dialogue, and this is just like why I love Brad Bird as a writer and director. You have that classic moment where he finally meets Mr. Incredible, and he starts monologuing. When villains sort of get so into themselves, they start basically talking and that usually gives the hero an opportunity to retaliate or do something. And he's like, you caught me monologue, sly dog. And I mean, what's greater than to hear a villain actually catch himself monologuing and saying something like that? I mean, when have we ever...
The only thing that comes close for me is Ozymandias going, I'm not some comic book villain, I already launched my attack 30 minutes ago.
Exactly. I love stuff like that. Now, here's another interesting thing. If you look at the behind-the-scenes material for The Incredibles on the DVD or Blu-ray, you can see an early, not an animated sequence, but it's an animatic sequence. Basically, sort of like the storyboards are edited together. There's some voice work and maybe some early sound effects and temp music. Sort of like an edited storyboard sequence, but it's not fully animated. There's a sequence where Syndrome invades the Parr family home, Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl, and he attacks Mr. Incredible, and I think then he tries to attack their baby, but then the baby basically beats him up. So Syndrome was more or less sort of like just a minor villain originally that they encounter and then they dispatch very quick. The real villain, I think, was supposed to be sort of like almost like a Ra's al Ghul, like sort of almost more like a James Bond kind of evil, old sort of mad scientist character. And that's something they changed. And this is just another case where I'm really glad they changed it and they made Syndrome the villain, because it's sort of, I like this dichotomy where you have these kind of like old over-the-hill heroes and you have this sort of young, brilliant, but also sociopathic inventor. He's a nerd. He's kind of like a comic book sort of nerd, if you think about it. I don't know. I just really I love this villain.
Well, he's presented very well in that his beef is pretty, he got spurned by his hero, basically kind of pushed him aside and downplayed his obvious genius intellect. No denying that the guy's a genius. So and he then decides, okay, I want revenge. I'm going to be better than all of you. And I mean, what's his line in there that, I'm going to, with my inventions and my genius finally recognized, I'll make everyone super. And when everyone's super, then no one.
Right. And that was kind of, I guess, Brad Bird's sort of overall message in the movie, how it's kind of an interesting argument how, as a society we've become, I guess we've kind of moved away from, I guess, American exceptionalism, where we have to include everyone. As a result of including everyone, everyone gets a trophy. We have to have graduation ceremonies for everyone, going from the 4th grade to the 5th grade. I mean, like seriously. Now that could be Brad Bird just sort of waxing philosophical on his political beliefs, but I mean, it's also interesting how we have this community of heroes who they can't do what they feel defines them, and as a result they're driven to work for Syndrome, and that leads to their own doom. So it's just why I love this movie, because there's so many interesting things going on in what's really sort of this family superhero film. So I like that there are all these bigger ideas and there's all this greater subtext that's really quite evident in the movie. And I really like the extra short. If you get the DVD, there's another short where you get a little more of Syndrome and seeing what happens, how he got to the Parr home, and how he got Jack from the babysitter.
I assume the babysitter threw the baby at him because she'd been dealing with this baby destroying the house, basically.
Pretty much. I don't know if you saw the short, but basically Jack has
he's got uncontrolled powers because he's a baby.
You're right. Like Jack doesn't have any powers. Well, Jack is basically omnipotent, has every superpower imaginable. And it seems he's basically Franklin Richards, if you think about it. And then Syndrome arrives, sans his mask. He's going to be the new babysitter for Jack. The babysitter's, she's done with Jack. She's getting out of there. And I think another one of my favorite lines, I think, was, so what does the S on your chest stand for? It stands for sitter. If it was BS standing for babysitter, that wouldn't be right. Something like that. Basically, like I can't have BS on my chest. We know what BS.
Yeah, that's
means.
pretty good, actually.
I can't have BS for babysitter on my chest because then it would be BS. I mean, just such a great. I love brilliant writing like that. And that's just kind of why I love this film and I love Syndrome. And to me, Brad Bird can do no wrong. I mean, look at the Iron Giant. You look at this movie, Ratatouille. He did Mission Impossible. Everything he's done is to me is fried gold.
Yeah, and well, we go from Incredibles, which has a great villain in Syndrome, to for a long time I feel probably the weakest of the Pixar films, and that's Cars. And Cars is another one of these that doesn't really have a bad guy. I mean, you have the three racers. You have Lightning McQueen, who's kind of a douchebag when you first, and you have the other racer who is just completely self-centered and a jerk. But you only see him in the beginning when they're racing, and then at the end when he wins the race and no one cares because he.
Chet Hicks, voiced by Michael.
Which makes sense because Michael Keaton's pretty awesome. But yeah, you have McQueen kind of learning his lesson about being, a race car and whatnot as far as that goes, and you have the Radiator Springs, which became irrelevant after the freeway system was built.
Right.
But you don't have much of a bad guy in the traditional sense, but you have a couple of different bad guys as far as the next one comes up in Ratatouille. On the one hand, you have the evil chef who wants to make a line of frozen dinners and just completely over-commercialize his product and have his name.
Skinner,
yes,
voiced by Anne Holm.
And then you have the evil, sort of, he becomes unevil at the end, but you have the evil critic, Anton Ego, who when I first heard it, I could have sworn I thought it was Christopher Lee the first time I heard it, but it's actually the now late Peter O'Toole, who passed away this week, so very sad.
Role by Peter O'Toole.
And so you have him as the critic who is just finds fault with everything, looks down his nose at everything, and you have these two very different villains who approach things very again. They're just very different. You have Skinner, who's just like, okay, wait, I can use this rat to make delicious food that I can then sell in supermarkets and become rich. And then, for me at least, in the ending of Ratatouille, when the character of Ego is reading his kind of bash on I wish I could remember the line exactly, but his line about being a critic is, even the most meaningless piece of junk is worth exponentially more than the critic's words denouncing it as such. It was just a great line, and one of the things that you write movie critiques for 411 Mania. We on the Ground and Pound show we talk about fight. We do a lot of criticizing. Not always in the bad sense, but we provide critiques. At least we try to, instead of just blatant criticism. And that was a really just kind of interesting line that I felt they included in there. And again, the great Peter O'Toole with his vocal delivery, even in just a voice role, still has just this great gravitas to what he brings to it. And the way that the animators were able to have the character look the part to go along with what O'Toole was able to do with his voice was really...
I mean, it was a great vocal performance. The design for the character was outstanding. But most of all, I love what they did with the character in that they kind of give him, whereas in other Pixar films we kind of see a character, we don't expect become sort of a heel at the end and do like a heel turn at the end. We have Anton Ego basically doing a baby face turn at the end and becoming sort of a good guy, and I really like that. It was just, and I think there is something to be said, even though the perspective of Anton Ego is coming from a creator and filmmaker like Brad Bird. But to me, it's an interesting take on sort of criticisms and critics by a great filmmaker and storyteller, and much better than what another filmmaker had done recently, M. Night Shyamalan, with I think Lady in the Water, where they had sort of almost like a similar sort of film critic character that kind of makes, it's kind of like a commentary on critics and who bashed Shyamalan's films. So I really like what I think Bird went in a much more interesting philosophical direction in the way he presented the Ego character, making him more sympathetic and more of a good guy.
What I got out of that was,
that's what I really liked.
End, to kind of go to your point here, what I got at the end was when he was eating the food that Remy prepared, he remembered why he loves food to begin with.
Right.
And that's it's a great moment, getting a bit abstract here maybe, but as a critic, when you become overly critical of things, you tend to forget what it was about a subject that drew you to it and made you enjoy it in the first place. And when you're able to have a moment within that medium that reminds you, no, wait, this is, I like this. There's a reason there's a reason you start critiquing things, because you enjoy it so much. You want to learn about it so you can speak intelligently about it. The problem is that, again, if you go too far, and the age of the internet, when everyone's not only a critic but also highly cynical,
right.
You go too far, and it's very easy to forget what it is about something that you enjoy. And
now,
at the end, he remembers.
Right. I love those moments, but I'm just curious about the ending. I love Ego's monologue, but there are parts of where they remove the curtain, and they have, and Linguini shows Ego how he did all the work with Raimi, the rats, and how they had all the rats cook the food. Parts of that didn't work for me. I don't know. I think I was sort of, I felt like it should have gone a different way. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they should have maintained some sort of ruse. But it's weird, because I like Ego's monologue, but having to explain everything to him doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't work. But I like the ending overall.
I agree with you. It's a tad jarring that, look, not all rats are filthy creatures. They make great pets. It's still difficult to accept that, wait, this cooked my food?
It doesn't break the film for me, but I agree, it is jarring. But what do you think about Ann Holmes' performance as this great? He's more of the traditional villain in the movie, really, and he kind of stays a villain at the end.
Skinner's great, just because he's such a self-absorbed, materialistic little. And Ian Holm does a great job as far as voicing this. He's got this kind of almost like frantic energy about him half the time. That's not always easy to convey in a voice role. And the people who can do it very well. Difficult to do more often. And all credit needs to go to him, because again, he's the bad guy. He's the active villain for a lot of them, trying to figure out how best to manipulate the situation, and he doesn't care about the original owner. He just wants to, whatever can make him the most profit is the way he's going to go.
And I think what I really like about this character is that this is really not, the typical Ann Holm type playing like a snooty Frenchess. And that's why I really like his performance. When I found out Ann Holm was playing Skinner, initially I didn't believe it. I was like, no way.
It doesn't sound like him.
It doesn't sound like him at all. And this is not, and this is kind of why, this sort of speaks to the quality of Pixar films, because I like, okay, we're going to have Ann Holm playing our villain. This is not the usual Ann Holm role. This is, at this point, he kind of been playing, these sort of Bilbo Baggins type of roles. He's playing sort of these paternal, grandfatherly characters. He kind of entered that.
His previous attempt to break from that didn't go over too well.
Right. So I love that he's playing. This is far away from Ann Holm's type in this story, and also not really a villain, but also you have Janine Garofalo as Colette. And she's wonderful and great.
Yeah, this is one of those movies that it's kind of sad, because I don't know what it is about it that doesn't quite resonate as much as Pixar's other films or other films in general, because there's so much about it that is off. But I wish I could put my finger on it about what it is that just doesn't quite resonate. And it might be the fact that after Ratatouille, we get quite possibly for the longest time Pixar's best movie, and that's WALL-E.
WALL-E.
To think about putting a movie out in 2008 where the first half of the movie, more or less, has no spoken dialogue. It borders on insanity, but it's done so perfectly that, that's the strongest part of the movie, is before we get into the axiom and all of the people. Before we get spoken dialogue to kind of drag it down, it's just, that's the best part of the movie, and that's not necessarily a knock on the rest of it. It's just that the first half or so is so phenomenal.
WALL-E did a lot of bold things that you don't really see and that's sort of what's great about Pixar, is because they figure out interesting ways of experimenting. And Pixar can make it work really well because, one, they're Pixar and they sort of have that reputation with the general movie-going audience, and they do it in such an amazing sort of inclusive way that you can really just be immersed in it and you can really get caught up in it. Like, there are sections of this movie that are shot in live action. All of, Fred Willard does his whole performance live in this story.
And Wally's always watching old movies. Right.
Exactly. So that was a sort of a new sort of experimental thing for Pixar in this movie. And the first half of this movie is also very experimental. It's sort of this very sort of almost sort of like reading like Arthur C. Clarke or Carl Sagan, where or a book. It's sort of like in a book where you have just large chunks where there's not a lot happening. There's not really like where the hero isn't really like driving in the middle of a conflict. He's just sort of going around just doing stuff. And that was really interesting to me. So we see that for the first half until he gets to the Axiom, and we sort of meet what turns out to sort of be an antagonist of sorts in the movie, and Otto, the computer AI of the Axiom, voiced by McIntosh.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. For those of you who don't know, there's not a voice actor doing Otto. They actually got the old computer program Macintalk, where you punch things into a Mac and it spits out the dialogue that you type in, but it comes off. I'm just curious as to how did that, you're more knowledgeable about film and techniques and whatnot than I am. How did that play for you? Whether you sing it live or thinking back on it, do you enjoy what that brought to it, or was it a detracting thing having the dialogue?
I loved Otto because Pixar is so good that it's not just like the sound effect. It's sort of the whole package. So you have the animation work you have on Otto, which was very well done, and so you sort of get that Otto is a character, even though his sort of tones come out of the Macintalk program. He's sort of still this sort of living, breathing character, and he has personality, and that's again, that just sort of speaks of the quality of Pixar. Now, I think you also have to credit the sound work by the Academy Award-winning sound effects editor, Ben Burt, who actually did the vocal tones and voice recording for Wall-E and Mo. So I imagine he was the one who put together the words that came out of Otto in the movie. So I think you sort of have to credit him to some degree.
Well, given how much of this movie relies on sound effects.
What was that?
Given how much of that movie relies on sound effects, the man deserves all the praise in the world.
Exactly. I mean, what a tremendous statement for Ben Burt to be working on this movie. I mean, Ben Burt, he's one of the most unsung heroes of all of cinema. He's the one. He created all those sounds that are so classic and resonant with all of us in the Star Wars films. The X-wing starting up, the punches in Indiana Jones, and just those classic punching sounds. All those things created by Ben Burt. And then finally he got to work on a Star Trek picture in 2009, and he essentially gave life to Wall-E. He is our Wall-E, and he is Mo, who's sort of the show stealer of this movie. So I think you also have to credit him for Otto as well. Ben Burt is without a doubt one of the great heroes of cinema in history, without a doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, like you just mentioned, the films that he has done and the sound effects he has created still, you still recognize some of those sounds when you hear them.
I mean, I think he did all the sound design for Wall-E as well.
I believe he did.
Right. He was the character voice designer, the sound designer, and the supervising sound editor. So he had to have been responsible for for Otto in the film.
Yeah. And also, interesting side note about Wall-E, that was the first animated movie since Beauty and the Beast to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture.
What won that year?
Don't know. It was 2008.
Should have been Wall-E.
Let me check. We'll move on from Wall-E into Up, which has an interesting villain, two of them, because I kind of view Alpha as separate from the Explorer. Slumdog Millionaire one.
Yeah, it should have been WALL-E.
That was the same year that The Dark Knight did not get nominated for a bunch of things that probably should have been.
That one also should have gotten nominated. But look, I got nothing against Slumdog Millionaire, but come on, guys, come on. Seriously? Does anyone still remember or care about Slumdog Millionaire? No.
I don't.
No, you don't.
Here we are still talking about WALL-E.
Exactly. We're still talking about The Dark Knight, for crying out loud. But yes,
we still talk about, by the same token, we still talk about Citizen Kane, and less it happened one night. So.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. If you think about it, some of the films that get the big awards are the least memorable, and I guess they get the award and people just forget about them sometimes.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, the next one, again, Up, was also nominated for Best Picture, if memory serves correctly.
It's almost sort of we're reaching the Pixar. We're on the road. We're reaching the summit of Pixar Mount Everest with Toy Story 3, basically.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was wrong about that. WALL-E was not nominated for Best Picture. Up was.
Oh,
which
okay.
was the first one since
Well,
Beauty
it
and the Beast.
should have been. To me, it should have been. It was that good. Dark Knight should have as well. Not The Dark Knight Rises, but definitely The Dark Knight.
Okay, yeah. Moving on to Up, we have the first 10 minutes or so of this movie is probably the most effective romance ever committed to film, and it's just all preamble to Ed Asner going on this journey with the fat Cub Scout and meeting the bad guys here. But this is another one that doesn't have necessarily the traditional villains in the sense that some other ones do, because we don't meet. I'll look up the character's name because I can't remember.
Charles Muntz, played by Christopher Plummer.
Yes, we don't meet him for a long time until near the very end.
Well, we see the film reel. We see young Carl Fredricksen at the beginning as a little boy, watching the film reel of his hero Charles Muntz, going on the journey to find the lost bird creature.
Bird, Kevin.
He's going after that bird creature. After his reputation was tarnished, he's going out there with all his dogs and his giant blimp. So yeah, we see tiny glimpses of him.
And then we get, and again, the great Christopher Plummer, who again, not enough good things can be said about. But he, again, when you first meet him, you're not necessarily aware he's the bad guy until you realize, no, wait, he's after this poor bird who just wants to be with her baby. But the other villain here is Alpha, the Doberman pincer, voiced by Bob Peterson, who also did the voice of Doug. And also, he's also the director and co-writer of this movie. So it's sort of another set. We get this. And this, I like this because I like this idea that the creators of the film, they sort of take an active role in the story by playing these characters, and I really like it. Yeah, and as far as Alpha goes, Dobermans have been, dogs that you perceive as evil tends to switch from generation to generation depending on, events that take place around you. I mean, after World War II, German Shepherds were thought to be, bloodthirsty. Then you have Dobermans, then you have Rottweilers, now you have Pit Bulls. Remind that it's always people who do those things, but again, that's a completely different spiel. But here you have, an imposing dog, and I mean, almost comically, his voice, the collar that allows him to speak constantly malfunctions, and his voice comes out as though he's been breathing helium instead of what it actually is, which is quite menacing when it's done when Muntz fixes and you hear his real voice. It's actually quite intimidating. It just frequently winds up being this comical voice that comes out of it.
I love Alpha, and I love all of the dog minions in this story. I love that they all kind of have their own sort of like little quirks, and I love the way they use the collars to sort of externalize sort of dog sort of personality things, sort of like with the squirrels. And I love that they can talk, and they do the Star Wars Red Leader standing by, Red 5 standing by. I love that. I love all the comedy that comes out of Alpha and his malfunctioning collar and the fun they have with that. But more than anything, I love the kind of turn they do with Charles Muntz in this story, where you meet him and he seems docile enough. He's old geriatric old man. I mean, think of
he's older
how
than,
old.
You know, you have to think about Ed Asner, the main character, is old. And this guy was in his 20s going exploring when he was a kid.
Exactly.
This guy's old.
I mean, like this guy. I mean, if you think about how old Carl is in this movie, voiced by Ed Asner, Charles Mutz at least has to be old enough to be his father, so he's even older. So he's like, this guy is so old. Like, what can he do? And then there's this almost sort of slow burn that you realize, even though that he's sort of this almost doddering old man, he's actually quite lethal. And he basically reveals that he murdered people, just these harmless, innocent bystanders, because he's just so fixated and obsessed with finding Kevin the bird that it's made him literally go insane. Maybe he's senile, I don't know, but it's quite scary once we see him make that turn.
And Christopher Plummer's voice acting is a big part of that. In addition to character design and the way they, just the whole framing of that scene is really awesome. But again, a lot of that hinges on a good vocal performance. And again, every bad guy that Pixar has done, you've had a solid voice performance, and Christopher Plummer is absolutely no exception. Again, when you're an actor of his quality, giving less than your best, an asinine thought.
Okay, now, when you were in the theater and you saw this for the first time, Robert, what did you think of the old man?
Sorry, the what?
The old man duel. You had Carl and Muntz just duking it out as geriatric old men.
It was odd because it's comical in the sense that you have these two old guys fighting, and there are frequent little jokes about it, but at the same time these two guys want to kill each other, and that reality is translated very well within the film. These two guys are fighting for their lives. It's just they happen to be old.
Again, I think only a Pixar movie could really make a sequence like that really work. I think you try this in any other movie, like an executive would probably either shoot it down and say, we're not doing this. This is stupid. The audience will never buy this. This will never work. I think only a studio like Pixar could really get a sequence like this in a movie and make it work as well as it does.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things that you're laughing at it because there are elements of it that are humorous, but at the same time, it's an extraordinarily tense and serious circumstance.
Well, I think even more so was the ultimate end for Charles Muntz. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you're a great villain, you have to have a great ending. Your fall from grace has to be pretty substantial. And Muntz, when he just, especially because it was the balloon that finally kind of undid him, which have been just kind of floating around in the background for about half of, and he tries to jump after them, and he trips on balloon strings, which is, again, it's comical in many ways, but it causes the poor guy to fall to his death, so it's not, it's clearly not that funny.
I forget, what was the name of the blimp? Okay, it was the Spirit of Adventure. I like this idea that ultimately Carl sort of lets go of his house and the balloons, and he kind of acquires the Spirit of Adventure at the end.
Yeah. It's there are so many good things about Up. I mean, just it being nominated that year for Best Picture. It won Best Animated Picture. It was also nominated for Best Picture.
I mean, I'm glad we can recognize animated features for their quality and right now, but I guess sort of my problem with that awards category is, to me, it's a consolation prize. And it's a way to not acknowledge how good some of these movies really as Best Picture candidates. Honestly,
what won that year? That was an odd year for.
I think it was. It was
the Hurt Locker.
Hurt Locker, right? It was Hurt Locker, right?
Well, that was when they went from 5 nominations to 10. So we get some odd
guys,
movies.
I'm not
being
saying
nominated.
Hurt Locker is a bad movie, but come on, seriously, Robert, come on.
I don't disagree with you, and to be perfectly honest, the next one we're going to talk about,
that movie, Hurt Locker probably had the most expensive Academy Award campaign ever. Hurt Locker is a decent little sort of war movie, but it is not a Best Picture movie. I'm sorry, it's not. And that movie,
that was the same year. Well, that was also the same year Inglourious Bastards was nominated, and I personally would have put that over the Hurt Locker if nothing.
And there was Avatar too, but look, come on.
Yeah, there are some movies
my
that
problem
win,
with
like
Hurt
you said.
Locker is, here's my problem with Hurt Hurt Locker. Every year you can find a dozen movies just like Hurt Locker that have those kind of small, kind of, in and out releases that, that maybe don't get that amount of critical acclaim, and it just seems manufactured. And I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I think it's a decent movie. I'm just saying every year I can find probably a dozen movies just like that with similar releases that do not get like that kind of big awards push.
Well, the fact that it was done by James Cameron's wife probably didn't hurt.
Ex-wife.
Ex-wife.
One of his many. His current wife is Susie Amos, the granddaughter from Titanic. Different wife. I think that's his first wife.
I could make jokes, but I'm not going to. I'm going to move on. Because
will you try?
Well, because following up, we get, for my money, the best Pixar movie there has been so far, and that's Toy Story 3.
Yes,
and we get
the peak. As I said earlier, the peak of Pixar's Mount Everest is Toy Story 3.
Yeah, and we get, since we're just kind of talking about the bad guys here, we get the worst. I mean, you asked me kind of off the air, I think, who my favorite Pixar villain is, and I didn't have to think too much. I said lots, and Lotso Huggin' Bear is just, I'm not entirely sure how best to character. Well, first of all, Ned Beatty, who did the voice, very specifically chose the Louisiana accent that Lotso uses because he thought that it was a warm, inviting, kind of sets you at ease vocal pattern. And so when he turns on you, it just becomes, even if it's just kind of subtly in terms of his accent, it's just that much more effective, because you see it coming just a little bit less. And
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, he's the bad guy, and we all know it, and he wants to run the daycare center like a prison because he was burned by his child, never wants to possibly feel that again. For me, I didn't get just how far gone he was until near the end when he and the other characters, he and Buzz and Woody and Jesse are all going through the waste plant, and he's the one that they are able to send up to hit the emergency stop button to get them out of what winds up being the incinerator. And even I'm sitting there in the theater and I'm watching this, and even though he's the bad guy, for some reason I thought he's not going to leave. He's not going to leave them to that fate. He'll stop it. They'll still be enemies. He'll go back. He'll still be whatever it was. I didn't expect him to get up there, look at the emergency stop button, look back down and say, well, where's your kid now? And then walk off.
It was pretty nasty. But that being said, I love Lotso so much that when we get the backstory from I forget the clown, there was a clown character voiced by one of
Chuckles, Miles.
I think you're right, but he was voiced by Bud Lucky, who's another Pixar mainstay.
Chuckles.
Right.
Chuckles the clown, who we first see having the most dour expression possible.
He's most recently voiced Eeyore in the new Winnie the Pooh. He was the government agent in The Incredibles. He was the Jackalope in I think, what was it, Rebound? He's worked on a lot. He's worked on a lot of shorts and a lot of Pixar films. Yeah, it was Chuckles, as Bud Lucky voicing Chuckles. That backstory for Lotso and Chuckles and the doll, the little baby doll, was heartbreaking to me. It was so heartbreaking that, I really felt bad for Lotso. And even after all the terrible things Lotso did to our Toy Story heroes, I kind of felt bad that he's sort of resigned to this fate as being sort of this bug catcher on the grill of a pickup truck at the end. I kind of didn't want that to happen to Lotso. Robert, is there something wrong with me?
No. I mean, look, I would have been with you, like I said, up until he decides, no, you can all burn in hell, which is almost literally what he was resigning to. I mean,
I love all that, and I love all the symbolism at the end, because it literally felt like we're going. It's like we're facing hell at the end, basically.
Oh yeah, and again, a great villain tends to have if there's a way you can understand them or sympathize with them, that just makes them better in a lot of ways. So when you understand kind of where he's coming from, it makes him almost sympathetic in the sense that, oh wait, you're not just crazy. What happened to you could happen to anyone pretty much. They left their toys behind. It happened. And but again, for him to go that far with it was when I kind of went, okay, you winding up strapped to the grill of this truck is almost exactly what you deserve.
But I love Ned Beatty's voice. He has this kind of he almost kind of has this kind of grandfatherly quality, but he's like then he turns evil, because he turns out to be almost like this evil prison leader kind of warden. And then you have Ken. You have Michael Keaton again in a Pixar film as Ken, as the Ken doll, who's sort of, he's on their side, but he's clearly conflicted because he's in love with Barbie.
Who doesn't love Barbie?
I mean, Ken loves Barbie. That's how it is.
Yeah, and again, Michael Keaton, if his physical, if his motion picture career is for whatever reason stalled, his voice work is actually quite good. Whatever you happen to find it in, here as Ken, he does a great job, kind of embodying, when you hear Ken, when you imagine Ken, the kind of sidekick to Barbie, I now hear what Michael Keaton was doing, and I'm okay with it because he did a great job with that. Again, just, in general, his voice work is quite good, and if he, for whatever reason, can't find, in front of the camera work, I would not be shocked to see. More people should probably try.
RoboCop coming out in February. He's the head of OCP.
Yeah, which will be awesome. He, depending on how they take the movie. He's
let's
correctly
not
cast.
get ahead of ourselves, Robert. But he is in that. And
he's correctly cast. Let me say that he could do that role if it's either version. Actually, if he's either the pseudo benevolent head of OCP or the executive vice president, or the evil executive vice president, if we're referencing the first one.
I thought he was.
He could probably do either.
Other guy.
Oh, Bob Morton.
No,
I don't know why I remember his name.
Michael.
No, Bob Morton is the character's name from who's in charge of RoboCop.
In the other guy, the movie, the other guys, Michael Keaton in the Will Ferrell, Mark Wahlberg cop comedy.
I actually haven't seen that. I don't tend to enjoy Mark Wahlberg or Will Ferrell.
I think it's. To me, it's not an exceptional movie, but I think Michael Keaton has a fun turn in it, but it's like what can an aging superhero actor do at this point? It's kind of unless he does Beetlejuice 2, which I'm hearing they could do.
I hope he does because he was awesome.
Look, I think Michael Keaton is without a doubt a very underrated performer. He does a great job as Ken in this movie, and I like how Ken kind of turns around at the end. And we're still seeing Ken showing up in Toy Story media because, they keep doing these shorts and specials and what have you, which are fun. I'm
glad they do. I don't want a fourth Toy Story movie because I feel the ending was that strong.
Right. Because, ultimately what...
Shorts like that, I don't mind... What was it they said after it came out? And because after it did, the movie made over $1 billion.
Right.
So once everyone kind of got there's they ended it perfectly. Well, no, there's going to be a sequel. It made too much money not to make another one, and you kind of got the debate.
Ultimately, what's going to happen? See, here's the only flaw of Toy Story 3. Ultimately, the solution is only really just they've delayed the problem a little more. They had a problem. They said goodbye to Andy. Now they have a new child who ultimately is going to get up, going to get old, going to get rid of all the toys eventually and throw them all away or give them away or whatever, and it's really just going to happen all over again. So they're only really continually delaying the inevitable. So do we really want to – I'm saying Toy Story 3 sort of effectively ended it, so and now we can kind of see them living it up and having fun, but do we really want to see them going through all those – emotionally wrenching, sort of tragic moments again? No, we don't. We don't want to really see
I
that.
don't think my heart could take it, to be perfectly honest. I saw that when it came out in theaters with my grandfather and two of my brothers, and I'm bawling in the theater.
And that is why we cannot see a Toy Story 4, because we cannot go through such an emotionally heart-wrenching experience again. My heart could not take another Lotso backstory because it was so heartbreaking and so sad and so tragic. It was it was horrible for me seeing that because you feel for the toys, man. Even when it's bad as Lotso, you feel for Lotso.
Even the evil toys, be it Lotso or Stinky Pete, there's a degree of they're written so that you can sympathize on at least some level with them.
Exactly, and you hit it on the head. Where I could not take another story like that. It would be too much, and that speaks to the quality of Toy Story 3.
Which that was what was the Oscar winner that year? I was just looking at it. Wasn't that the King? The one in
I think you're right. Yeah, the King's Speech was 2010, so I think you're right.
So that was Should have been Toy Story 3.
I mean, look, I'm not going to argue that because the King's Speech is pretty much Oscar bait, you know. So I mean, it's more of that type.
It happened. And I'm not knocking the King's Speech. It's a fine movie.
To me, better something like the King's Speech, which is like really artsy than the Hurt Locker. Which, again, I like the Hurt Locker. I think it's a good movie. But, again, to me, every year you can find a dozen Hurt Lockers. I guarantee.
Yeah.
To me,
I was just glad I was happy that Jeremy Renner got recognition.
I just saw the Lone Survivor this week, and I think Lone Survivor was a very good movie. But to me, Lone Survivor is about on par with something like Hurt Locker. And Lone Survivor was based on a true story too.
Yeah, I was just happy that Jeremy Renner got some notoriety out of it because I'm a fan of Jeremy Renner. So silver lining.
He was a good Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go to.
I think hands down the worst Pixar movie there is, and that's Cars 2.
Interesting.
I know you and I are going to disagree on that point, which fair play. No, we disagree. We must clearly become blood enemies.
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I see why Cars 2 is problematic and why it's not as well liked as others, because this movie is without it. It's a toy grab. This movie is a money grab, and the way in here, I do have a big problem with the movie. The whole thing about oil and big business, to me, none of it really flies with me, because how do you think Disney stays in business, and how do you think they made this movie because of Cars toys, without a doubt, to sell more Cars. Where do you think all those Cars toys comes from, John Lasseter? Where do you think they get the power to build all those Cars toys that are funding your kids' college educations and your bonuses and all that?
If I could bring up something else.
It's natural gas and oil, guys. Think about it. It's not alternative energy.
One other thing about that, how does that work in a world where cars are alive? I mean, what if there's no oil in a world where cars are alive? I mean, how does that work?
They have an all-natural biofuel.
Do we all become 30 mile an hour and run on corn oil? I don't know. It's just, to me, just criticizing something like
all-natural biofuel. Again, putting that kind of subtext in a Pixar movie about racing cars in a world where cars are alive, it doesn't fly. It doesn't work. Okay, and it's preachy and it's silly and it doesn't work. But I digress. So who are the villains in this movie? We have a couple villains in this movie. That's kind of one part a racing movie. It's also another part like a spy James Bond movie with Michael Caine as sort of like a James Bond character. Finn McMissile.
Poor Michael Caine. He deserved better.
Look, the movie is problematic. I like the movie. I think it's entertaining. I like the arc that Mater goes through. I like his conflicts with Lightning. To me, there are good things in it, but yes, I agree that it is very problematic, and I see why people have issues.
And yeah, I haven't seen it, so any discussion of the villains as far as that goes has to come from you.
Okay, so just taking point here, we have Professor Z, played by German actor Thomas Kretschmann, basically your typical mad scientist minion. The true villain turns out to be Sir Miles Axelrod because he's actually a lemon. The bad guys in the movie are all lemons. That's kind of the thing. The lemons we're going to buy up all the oil, and we're gonna get back at all the good cars that aren't lemons by giving them this fuel that we're saying is like good for you, but if you drive too fast, it'll make you explode. So
I'm just looking at the voice cast here and going, man.
What was that?
I'm just looking at the voice cast here and going like, man, there's some awesome. I mean, Eddie Izzard is pretty awesome.
There's definitely some.
Don Turturro, Joe Mantegna, and Bruce Campbell.
I like all the locations in this movie, and and it's almost kind of like this James Bond spy film, but kind of giving it this sort of weird framing device of like big oil and lemons. We're gonna trick cars into using like all natural fuel or something, and it's gonna make them explode. And then there's no real solution at the end. Like they're trying to do a commentary on big oil, but at the end, like there's no other alternative really, except for this magical, all-natural biofuel that does not exist. So
unobtainium.
Look, pretty much.
Which may as well be called plot device.
Look, I get being a conservationist and being good to the environment. I think those are all great ideas, but we have to be realistic here. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The commentary in this movie is bad, and they should have left all that aside because it doesn't.
Now, I get the impression
But just final thing. I'm sorry here.
Okay, go ahead.
The voice work is all very good. Eddie Izzard, he's another one where you don't really. It's a twist where he turns out to be the bad guy. He's the Bond villain at the end, and he does very good. And he does good work. But I mean, no, this is far from Pixar's best work and an outstanding movie. And again, why I say Toy Story 3 is sort of I would say without a doubt the peak of Pixar's sort of just creative and commercial abilities at this point.
And here's hoping that what they keep coming up with is, because the next two we're going to talk about are, I mean, I can kind of guess your feelings on Brave, and since that's the next one, let's kind of touch on that one. I want to get your perspective on that, because I watched it actually for the first time in preparation for this. When I first saw previews for it, like the very first couple of teasers, I was kind of excited because, again, at this point, okay, you had Cars 2, but the last, 3 or 4 movies that Pixar had done apart from that are just phenomenal quality. So I was kind of excited for it, and then I read some reviews and just kind of went, really? That's the direction they took? So I didn't see it until, again, prepping for this when I got it from Netflix, so yay Netflix. So I just want your take on Brave as far as that.
My take on Brave is that it is very problematic. It is a good movie, but it's also a very flawed movie, and there are a lot of things that kind of disappointed me. This was another story that I think it was sort of a tale of two directors. They had 2 directors on this movie. 3 directors. Mark Andrews, Brenda Chapman, and Steve Purcell. I think this whole story was originally Brenda Chapman's idea, but I think she sort of had a parting of ways with Pixar, and then I think Mark Andrews and Steve Purcell basically finished it up. But I think this is just one of those instances where we know Pixar, they go through a lot of sort of creative development on their films where things can change wildly from the pre-production phase to the final product. And I think this is just an instance where it just didn't turn out very well. I think you can read stories about how Finding Nemo, about how much it changed in the production process and how different it was from that final product that was so beloved.
Well, as far as just to kind of go with that, I think the only Pixar movie that started the same and ended the same was The Incredibles.
Right. No,
because Brad Bird came in
as I pointed out earlier,
screenplay.
The Incredibles started out very different. Syndrome was not the main villain in The Incredibles. He was a minor villain that they encounter early, and the main villain was going to be sort of an older wealthy socialite kind of James Bond type of villain that they changed later. Syndrome was not always the main villain. Here, I don't really know what the main. I don't know how much they really changed it. So we have sort of this demon bear Mordu, who used to be I guess he was sort of the old king of Scotland, and he sort of forsaked his family to have power, and it kind of cursed him for all time in the form of this demon bear.
If memory serves, he's one of 4 brothers who
right.
each got a fourth of the kingdom. When their father died, he wanted the whole thing.
Right.
He wanted more power. The witch gave him the strength of 10 men, which incidentally turns you into a demon.
Right. Now, I mean, the trailers for this movie, the movie we got were not what the trailers were advertising. I think they just didn't really know how to really market this story and how to deal with kind of this sort of very kind of cliched story. We have the mother turning into a bear.
Yeah, to me, this was just a almost typical Disney as opposed to a Pixar film.
It was, and not really in a bad way, because this is an important movie. It's very, I think Merida is a great, important character. She's a tomboy, archer. She's a very, strong, empowering character. But the story they gave Merida, to me, didn't really fulfill the potential of having this sort of Scottish princess who doesn't want to fulfill, the gender roles assigned of her society, and being married off to this to these princes she doesn't like. She doesn't want to be a princess. She wants to ride horses, and she wants to shoot her bow and arrow. All that was couldn't really quite get the right story.
Yeah, and again, as far as villains for this, there aren't a whole lot. I mean, there is the demon bear who props up from time to time, but most of the conflict comes from the mother-daughter conflict.
Exactly.
And
you have
maybe
the
it's
witch.
Because I'm a guy, but it
Right.
didn't resonate as much for me. I mean,
I
can't.
The story didn't resonate as much with me either. And you had Julie Walters voicing this witch character, a wise woman, who could have been a good villain for the story, but they didn't go that route, and she has a very small role. And that was kind of one of the disappointing things about the movie to me, is that they could have done a lot of great things with the witch character voiced by Julie Walters, but she's barely even in the movie.
Yeah. It's almost like they were kind of setting her up to appear in the sequel. I mean, for other studios, that would have been my...
I doubt they're going to make a sequel. I mean, the trailers almost made it look like that King Fergus, voiced by Billy Connolly, was going to go to war with the other lords of the other Scottish kingdoms because of what Merida does. They didn't go that route at all.
No, not really, which could have been much more interesting. But
that could have been an interesting story where you have a conflict of a princess where she wants her freedom, but freedom could, the death of her kingdom. How can you, is your freedom more important than the greater good?
They touch on that a little bit, but it could have been explored a lot better, I think.
Yeah, but then all the Scottish lords, they just comedically duke it out. There's nothing really to their threats of their anger. It's all just played off for comedic effect, and that's just kind of speaks to my disappointment of the movie, is that I don't really feel like they delivered what they advertised or really on the potential of what they could have done with this premise.
Yeah, I agree with that. But so on to the last one that Pixar has done prior to their next one coming out.
I think, was this the first time in many years a Pixar film didn't get Best Animated Picture for 2012?
Cars didn't either. Was Cars 2 a wide release or direct-to-video?
Cars 2 was a wide release. Yeah, okay, so I think Cars 2 and Brave both lost out in their respective years.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm trying to remember if Brave even won Best Animated Picture.
I don't think it did.
It did. It won for Best Animated. But...
Quite honestly, I don't think it deserved it. I think it should have gone to Guardian.
Okay. Oh, yeah, no, Guardian. Never mind. I have film references there. Okay, but moving on to the last one that Pixar has done to kind of wrap this up, probably going to speed this along, Monsters University, a prequel, should have been subtitled When Mike Met Sully. So, again, instead of a sequel within the Monsters Incorporated universe, we go back in time to college for both James P. Sullivan and Mike Wazowski. And before we get into the bad guys, and there's two of them again, both done very well, I feel. How did this whole film play for you? Rather quickly, we got like 20.
I really liked the movie. It's a good movie to me. It sends me a lot of mixed signals at the end though, because there's this sense where Mike is the underdog. You want to see Mike and his team of misfit monsters succeed, but then they come to this realization that Mike is just not scary at all, and there's no way he could ever be a good scare. And ultimately, that's not where Mike goes on his career path. Okay, but the way they frame the movie and where Mike is this underdog and he's the main character this time, I feel like I wanted to see Mike succeed, become a scare, even though we know scaring is wrong and it's bad and it's not as powerful as the power of laughter and getting energy from laughter in Monsters, Inc. I think my problem is that there's a scene in the movie where Mike takes his group, they go to Monsters, Inc., and they see, okay, we might not be that scary, but it doesn't really matter. You don't need to be the biggest, scariest monster to be a good scarer. They see all the different monsters, and they see, okay, there's a different type of scaring monster for everybody. And then you kind of spend the whole movie kind of putting Mike down, saying how Mike can't be a good scare, and you ultimately want to see him succeed at the end. You want to see him score the big touchdown and win the game for everybody. And then you see his misfit scaring friends who are no scarier than him, and they get into the scaring program at the end because they apparently are scary. And none of that makes any sense to me.
Yeah, I agree.
What about you, Robert?
I kind of agree as far as the end goes, unless, I mean, I suppose the only maybe justification would be that even among the non-scary monsters, a green guy with one eye and, like, little horns and the shape of a sphere is just so not scary. There is no child in the world who is frightened. Whereas,
but
apparently, with some of the others, maybe somebody's afraid of an octopus.
Apparently Art, who looks like a Muppet, is scary.
An animal could be scary if he wanted to be, I think.
Art, there's nothing scary about Art, though. I mean, Charlie Day's voice is not scary.
Can't go back to prison.
He looks like a cuddly little Muppet.
He does. And again, yeah, there were some. The end of that did kind of was a little bit off for me as far as that goes. But since we're kind of short on time, I want to get through the two bad guys here because again, you have two of them. You have it's a college movie, so you have to have the evil dean. In this case, It's Dean Hardscrabble, and you have the great Helen Mirren doing the voice work.
The sexy Helen Mirren.
All right.
Thank you.
But
they say the sexy Helen Mirren.
I'm not going to.
Well, go on.
Fair enough. But she doesn't like Sullivan because Sullivan and Mike they break her memento for being like the best scarer of all time. She doesn't like either of them. Sully because he doesn't work hard and is privileged, and she says to Mike more than once, "You're just not scary," and it kind of sucks. But there it is. And at the end, she does kind of give them her blessing and wish them well. But for most of the movie, she's just very much against them. And the other, again, college movie. So the other bad guy is in charge of the best fraternity. I think it's a Worthington is his last name or what have you. The privileged
his name is Johnny, voiced by
Nathan
the
Fillion.
one and only
Nathan Fillion, who to nerds everywhere will always be Captain Malcolm Reynolds.
Exactly.
To the general public, he's Richard Castle.
And Johnny is great. He's like I like that they made Johnny. I like that they made this a pure kind of college movie kind of thing. So you have the head of the jocks, you have the evil jock, you have his goofy sidekicks, kind of like Revenge of the Nerds, and then you have the evil dean. I love that they kind of Pixar got to put their spin on those archetypes, and that's why I really did like them.
And just my one thought, again, as far as Fillion's character goes, his comeuppance comes, they win, but they cheated at the end. I don't mean to spoil the movie for anybody, but the line that Mike says to him when he says, "Don't worry, when you lose, no one will ever remember you existed," and Mike's response is, "Yeah, well, when you lose, no one will ever let you forget it." And it just was enough of a spin on being, the silver spoon privileged guy that I thought, you do kind of have to watch your back there, especially for that character, because again, it's just kind of the arc. And he gets his in because they lose. His fraternity loses the scare games. He goes on to work for a inferior company, and if memory serves, he doesn't work at Monsters, Inc. He works at like Fearco.
Right.
And then the dean just has her opinion changed of what Mike and Sully could do, and of course they go on to change the world at the end of Monsters, Inc. But
right, and to Dean Hardscrabble's credit, she does let the other monsters back into the scare school, except for Mike and Sully.
Yeah. So. I also loved the design of Dean Hardscrabble because it paired so well with what Helen Mirren was able to do from a voice acting standpoint.
It like that voice coming out of that body and that design to me was perfect. And when we meet Dean Hardscrabble, like she truly is scary. I think she is probably the scariest actual monster in all of these movies we've seen so far come out of this franchise.
I'd say so, hands down.
Now, I guess I'm curious, were you happy that they went with the prequel story rather than a sequel? Do you think they made the right decision there?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are ways you could go with a sequel, with their world changing and whatnot. I mean, because changing the world is not a simple proposition. Things are never easy. But going to college with monsters, it just presents so many opportunities for fun storytelling, and they were able to touch on a lot of them.
Right.
So in the end, I was happy with the direction.
I was mixed that they went with the direction of a sequel at first, but ultimately I think it was the right way to go because if you look at the first Monsters, Inc. and after everything that happened, that ending is so perfect. Do you really want to ruin that ending and see what happens after that ending?
Personally, no, unless, as has been speculated, Boo is actually Bonnie from Toy Story.
I mean, because me personally, I don't want to see what happens after he gets to see Boo again and we hear Kitty one last time. I don't want to see what happens after. I saw everything. I saw everything I needed to see. So I'm happy with the direction they went with this story, and I think Dean Hardscrabble was a great character, and I like how she kind of changes her mind at the end. And I think Nathan Fillion does a great job as Johnny, the sort of evil frat guy.
Nathan Fillion could play a jerk. Not like he has a history of that.
I wonder if you're trying to say something about Nathan Fillion here, Robert.
I've never met the man. I can't comment on his personality.
The great Nathan Fillion.
He's a very solid actor. He's a great actor.
Should have been Green Lantern.
Hey, I don't disagree. He's a great actor. If he happens to have an affinity for playing jerks, everybody has something they play well.
Even sort of one of my cinematic guilty pleasures. This is related to Nathan Fillion playing a jerk, so it's relevant to the discussion. Is Blast from the Past. It was this sort of late '90s movie with Brendan Fraser and Christopher Walken, Alicia Silverstone. He and his parents, they think the Cuban Missile Crisis actually happened, and the world got nuked, and so they're stuck in their sort of fallout shelter for 35 years. And then Brendan Fraser falls in love with Alicia Silverstone. Nathan Fillion has a small but memorable role as Alicia Silverstone's ex-boyfriend, and he plays a great jerk in the movie. And he's like the boyfriend. It's a good little role for him. This was pre Firefly and all that.
Yeah. So again, I can't comment on whether or not he is a jerk. He plays a jerk very well, and that can be taken as a compliment. So good on him.
He also does so if you go on YouTube and you look for The Daily Show. That's DALY. His little outing with Tim Daly is hilarious.
All right, that's going to wrap us up. So we got 10 minutes. So let's get plugs out of the way. It's been a really fun time having you on, Jeff. I hope to have you back at some point.
This was
so
awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on here. This was a privilege. This was an honor, a pleasure, and a privilege, Robert.
Thank you. So what do you got going on? Let's
okay.
Put on your plug.
So
You're
over in movies and TV, we have my review of Saving Mr. Banks. To me, this is a movie that should, without a doubt, be getting at least 2 Oscar nominations. It should get Best Actress for Emma Thompson as P.L. Travers. Tom Hanks, without a doubt, as Walt Disney. Listen, screw Captain Phillips. This is the movie that should be getting Tom Hanks's gold statue.
Oscar?
No, not Captain Phillips. I don't want to hear about Captain Phillips anymore.
No. I'm just saying this should get him his 3rd Oscar.
Just give him 2 Oscars if you have to for Captain Phillips and Walt Disney. But this is the movie I want him to get his next Oscar for, basically. So check out my review of Saving Mr. Banks. It's a wonderful movie. See it over the holidays. You'll have it's a very look. It's not a scathing portrayal of Walt Disney, but I think it is a very strong portrayal, and it's a great performance by both of these wonderful actors. DVD reviews. Check out my review of Doctor Who: The Day of the Doctor. That's the 50th anniversary special of the longest-running science fiction television show in the history of history. So check out my review of that. MMA's 3 Rs. I looked at the UFC on Fox 10 event. Fox 9. So be sure to look at that. Also, in movies and TV, I did last week's Fact or Fiction for movies. So that's I think that's still in the queue. So go ahead and check that out if you ever get the chance. And next game review will be Call of Duty Ghosts. It's just been such a busy time. I got to get back on the Call of Duty Ghost train and kill some more bad guys.
Killing bad guys is always fun. All right, as for me, Locked in the Guillotine is up live now. In the MMA zone of 411 Mania, I review UFC on Fox 9. Mighty Mouse knocks out Team Alpha Male again. Good for Mighty Mouse. I take a brief look at the vacuum of drawing power that's gone from the UFC now that GSP has taken a hiatus. Talk about, Bigfoot Silva failing a drug test. Shame on you, Easter Island head. And shame on you for trying to get out of it. And there's something else. Carlos Condit getting kind of screwed in the matchmaking as he's fighting Tyron Woodley. So just all your MMA news is covered
and blame Matt Brown for getting his herniated disc, for getting his discs
three
herniated.
Of them. How do you herniate 3 discs?
Obviously, he's overtraining.
He's immortal.
Fighters
Should
are
not
overtraining,
come to
so they don't get to the cage, and so they don't have to risk losing. They're pressuring themselves out of the fight by overtraining. That's what's happening. Or injuries due to drug and steroid.
Which is also a possibility. Both Jeff and I will be on the 411 Ground and Pound radio show this Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern. We will be, Mark Radlitz will be hosting. We'll be previewing UFC 168.
The granddaddy of them all. The card's so big, we have to pay another $5 for it, unless you go to Hooters, Buffalo Wild Wings, or whatever bar or restaurant is showing the pay-per-view.
Biggest rematch in company history, apparently, Chris Weidman and Anderson Silva.
And
Ronda Rousey and Miesha Tate.
Yes.
So we'll be breaking that down. Look forward to seeing you there if you're interested in MMA. I will, again, thanks to Jeff for being on here. A lot of fun having you on. Hope you can be back at some point in the future. As always, I will leave you with the words of Tony Montana. Until then, everybody, be safe. I'll see you next time.
So say good night to the bad guy.